Welcome to SEC Football, live here on the 440 Sports Network, brought to you by ML Rose Craft Beer and Burgers. I am Braden Gall, and that is Mitch Light of The Athletic, good friend of the pod. Mitch, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Hope you're doing well, Braden.
I'm doing wonderful. Back from forced family vacation, of which you do not know anything about anymore, since your kids are grown and out of the house.
They were both home for the last week, first time in like 8 months, and they're both gone now. So that's why you just see this. I'm just this, all the stress has been removed. I'm living nothing to do. It's great.
Okay.
No one to pick up. No one. I don't have to do anything.
You have to pick a bunch of college kids up when they're here?
No, I said no one to pick up. Like sometimes, you got to go to the airport to pick them up when they come home.
Oh, gotcha. That one time. Okay. I'm still in like every day at 4:00. I've got to pick up both of them.
Yeah.
And then take them to some practice, which of course we're in the spring season here.
Yeah.
So
it'll be over in 10 years. You'll be fine.
ML Rose Craft Burger and Beers. As I mentioned, 6 great locations all across Middle Tennessee. If you're coming to town, they're a great place to watch the game. Basketball, football, baseball. If you're coming into town, and a lot of you SEC fans are huge baseball fans. So if you're coming into Nashville, great place to get some of the best local beers that they have hand selected, and it's a fantastic burger. They got a burger of the month that changes every single week. And according to my wife, Mitch, who you know well, you were there the day she signed her letter of intent for the rest of her life.
Binding.
Yeah, it was, as binding as one as a letter of intent. She could get into the portal anytime she wants.
Yeah.
She continues to choose not to. But she says best ranch dipping sauce in the city.
Okay.
Bold claim.
So I'm confused though. You said burger of the month, which they change weekly. Why don't they change it?
Did I say that? Did I say that weekly?
I think you messed up. So
I did.
That's my way of just telling you messed up. So for all those people out there, it's burger of the month. It's not burger of the week.
Thanks for coming on the show, Mitch. Do appreciate it. We'll talk to you next time.
I've done my job.
Just like old times. Just get back on the bike.
Braden says something dumb, I correct him.
Fair enough. Well, hopefully I'll say a lot of dumb things today on the show, which is always what is great to have you around for. So make sure you check out them. And a 7th location coming in East Nashville in my neighborhood, of which my kids are very, very excited about. So ML Rose. Okay. So today on the show, I wanted to have sort of a long, meandering conversation about resources, investment, decision-making by programs, in particular the SEC, obviously, about a lot of different things, because there's a lot of different stories right now, including the NCAA Tournament, which I know it is like your favorite event in the world. And so a lot of different things. 14 out of 16 teams make it for the SEC. I will ask you for your final 4 picks and a couple of basketball questions at the end, so stay tuned for that. But I'm fascinated because the SEC chose to invest in basketball in 2016 when it hired Mike Tranghese, the former Big East commissioner, and said, we need to be good in basketball. And they have done more than that. They've created arguably the greatest college basketball league ever assembled. And some of that is there's other circumstances, conference expansion, whatever. There's all kinds of reasons for it. But that was the impetus for being as good as they are today in college basketball. Record-setting 14 teams in the NCAA tournament. A couple of other big stories have hit recently that got me thinking about investment and resources and decision-making. We know that the NCAA House settlement, whatever comes of that, will happen. At least the first chapter of that story will come out on Championship Monday. Ironically, $20 million payroll is what universities are budgeting for their rosters moving forward when they can pay players directly. Recently, and this came out, it hasn't officially been finalized yet legally, but it's coming, and that is a settlement between the NCAA and a few states' attorneys general, including Jonathan Scometti here in Tennessee, that name, image, and likeness, NIL, will be allowed to be used as inducements in recruiting. We knew that was coming eventually, too.
Yeah, that made headlines, but that was really just, there's already been an injunction. So that was just that has not changed anything, that announcement.
No. A couple of weeks ago, I think, Dan Lanning, the head coach at Oregon, is now an $11 million a year coach with a $20 million buyout. That elevates Oregon, who, for those in the SEC that don't know, Mario Cristobal left for his dream job at Miami very quickly. Willie Taggart left Oregon very quickly to go to Florida State, which is also his dream job. Dan Lanning does not have a dream job, although he was courted by Alabama last year and was on the Georgia staff with Kirby Smart. There'll be a reason I'm bringing him up, of course. And then a great story in The Athletic. Make sure you go subscribe, pay for good journalism. Matt Baker, of course, wrote a big story about who's been front and center on South Florida and all the Florida schools for a while. Sorry, Mitch, this is a long buildup. $340 million stadium, not quite underway yet, but South Florida views the investment in that stadium on campus as a way to get themselves above the fold, let's call it, in whatever realignment could be coming in 2030. Auburn, Alabama, and Ole Miss, to bring it into the SEC, have put on pause major stadium renovations, due in large part to the exact conversation we're going to have today. Florida, in the meantime, is in looking into $1 billion renovation. So that's a lot of wind up to sort of say, what is important? What is important to an athletic department right now? How would you prioritize resources?
It depends on who you are. Alabama, some of those schools are starting from a much higher point. South Florida obviously needs to make that investment to get from, if you're going from a scale of 1 to 10, and I'm just making up these numbers, from a facility and where they are on the food chain, let's say South Florida's a 2.5. They need to make that investment to get up above 5. They need that stadium. Aside from like making the leap to a bigger conference, you turn on a college football game on a Thursday night or whatever, and a game in South Florida, there's just no environment. They played in an NFL stadium. Sure, if they're really good, there's a good crowd, but they need an on-campus stadium. So, I don't view that as South Florida is skewing other things for this. They needed that. And Florida, and I don't follow this as close as I used to, but I think a misconception about fans is Florida never had great facilities. Urban, they won despite of them when they're winning national championships. So they are behind and they have caught up. They built a new baseball stadium. Alabama, I believe, was at the forefront of the facilities race. So they are already starting from a 9.2. So to get to a 9.8, it's not worth it for them. They would rather use their resources elsewhere. Here in Nashville, Vanderbilt went under this big campaign, and I don't know, it started before the pandemic, so the ball got rolling, but they built this basketball facility I've been in, and it's amazing. It's called the Huber Center or whatever. They needed to separate themselves or to get on par with other teams. So if you are, name a great basketball program in the league, whatever it is, Tennessee, Kentucky, if you're trying to recruit, you bring a kid in, the program speaks for itself. If you're one of the teams at the bottom half and you haven't won lately, you need some certain things to show you're committed. So a new practice facility can do that, if that makes sense. So there's no one right answer. It's just you need to, everyone says, oh, you need to do what you need to do for your own career. It's every school needs to do what it needs to do for where it is on the food chain in that particular sport.
Well, and Vanderbilt's unique in that, and I want to point to Baylor and TCU as sort of the originators of this, which is quality over quantity. And as far as stadiums go, they spent probably about $300 million a piece to sort of build McLean Stadium in Waco and then renovate.
I think that was a great investment for Baylor.
No, of course. And Amon Carter in Dallas, which is where TCU plays, it was about a $280-300 million investment. Those are both very private, wealthy schools with very high-end stadiums, but very small. And Vanderbilt is doing the same exact thing. Very wealthy endowment, very wealthy fan alumni base. They're not going to try to build a 50,000 stadium and compete with even Kentucky or Mississippi State from an attendance standpoint. It's build high-end amenities. Here's the other angle and what I like about talking with you, Mitch, is we don't know where this is going to go. One of the things that I have talked to a lot with bowl directors is why we're not going to get more on-campus playoff games. And it's number one, it's corporate partnership without a place to put them during the game. And that is suites. I was touring the new Nissan Stadium a couple weeks ago here in Nashville. They have 132 suites planned.
Wow. For
the new Nissan Stadium. How many suites are going to be in, and you may not know this, I'm putting you on the spot, in the new Vanderbilt Stadium? That was a big part of it, but it's a big part of it, right? Developing those really nice.
Yeah, well, it's just whatever, more comfortable places to watch the game, but I don't know. Yeah.
So again, quantity is not as important anymore. Quality is very important. So I could see the big schools, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, investing far more. And I think this is what LSU is doing in Baton Rouge, right? Where they're trying to make the environment in the building so much nicer for fans that are there. Well, maybe not as big. We're not trying to compete on the 110,000 thing anymore.
Yeah, I mean, no school. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. Every school sort of needs to be concerned about attendance to some degree. I mean, look what happened to Ohio State in the playoff game. When all those Tennessee fans got in there. So you need to make the experience as good as possible for those fans when they're there. I mean, college football games are an investment, not just investment in money. They're a lifestyle, a time investment. We love it, but if you go to a game, especially if you don't live in that city, the games are almost 4 hours. The parking, the tailgating, it's an all-day event. And if you get into that stadium, you don't want to be uncomfortable. You don't want to be miserable. You don't want to not be able to log on and check a score of the game because the Wi-Fi sucks. So these teams know they're competing for time, resources, dollars. You can't just sit back and say, we're the University of Tennessee. We know 100,000 people are going to come. If you're winning, if you're winning a high level, you can do that. But the second you go 7-5 2 years in a row, and then you have not made the viewing experience or the experience at the game any better, that's when people stop coming.
So here's the other question, and this is related to the Lanning extension. Saban drove up the price of coaching. Kirby Smart drove up the price of coaching. It's just a $10 million job now at the highest levels in college football. That's just what it is. It feels like, to your point about South Florida, having an on-campus facility, stadium-wise, is table stakes. Like, if you want to be included in the game, you got to have that. Now, everybody in the SEC's got that. Vanderbilt is going to be kind of joining the party there with a much better facility. Is it not? If I were to sit in an athletic department meeting and we were doing a budget meeting, and I said, I want to pay the coaching staff as much as possible and the players as much as possible. I'm going to call this the trash can theory, which is, to quote Mike Loxley, recruits will change. They'll change in a trash can if they're making $25,000 that day.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious if you subscribe to that theory, that if you're investing resources and you have a limited, finite number of dollars, and we're about to have a $20 million rough, I'm going to ballpark this.
Yeah.
At some point, we're going to have payrolls of about $20 million or salary caps or something. What is the actual benefit of the facility, the locker rooms, the player lounges, the stadium, all this stuff, if the thing that builds success and sustainability is an extremely badass coach and the staff that he builds and talented football players? Is it not that simple?
Yeah, well, I think Loxley's point is well taken. Obviously it's an exaggeration, but you need, and if I'm answering your question, if I'm not, let me know. But you need a baseline of facilities. You need a comfortable locker room. You don't necessarily need a locker room with reclining chairs and an Xbox and all that for every player. You just need. So then, once you get to that point where you think you have what you need, then you can invest your resources elsewhere. Now the problem with that is everyone still wants to keep up with the Jones. That's fine, but if State University A says, we like our locker room, we like our training room, we're going to divert our money elsewhere. Well, they think State University B is doing both. Why can't we do both? So I don't know if these schools have the self-control to stop. And this is, I know we're just kind of going all over the place, but Bruce Pearl, I think he said it. I was at the SEC tournament last week. I think he said this. He said this multiple times, but I heard him say it. They were going to build a practice facility, a Auburn basketball practice facility. And he's like, I looked around and Jordan-Hare Stadium needed this. The baseball stadium needed this. And I said, we don't need this right now. I'd rather divert our money and elsewhere, NIL, whatever. That's fine. I commend Bruce Pearl for that. But it's easier for him to say that when he's been to a Final Four. He's won SEC championships. He's already on my made-up scale of 1 to 10, he's already at a 9. Other schools that aren't there, they need to improve their resources and find ways to get better players, improve their facilities to get better players. So it's all a sliding scale. It's all where you are in the food chain and where you need to get.
I find it. I'm trying to learn from what we've seen in college football. And I think Michigan and Ohio State, we've talked about it a lot on this show with a lot of different people, that the lesson from the two of them is sort of pay the players you have, right? Ohio State went out and paid a little bit more, but they had high-level coaches in Jim Harbaugh and Ryan Day. They kept a lot of players home. James Franklin, frankly, is trying to do this right now at Penn State by paying $3 million for assistants and keeping all of his guys from going to the NFL. That's part of the model. But what I'm trying to figure out is valuing all the other stuff. Now, most of these SEC teams have a pretty nice on-campus stadium, football-wise. Now, I know the Swamp needs to be upgraded, and all these schools have upgraded. And I don't want to stay focused too much on just the stadium. But it's about how to invest your time and your resources, because to your point about who you are in the conference, you're battling different things also. If you're Alabama and you're Georgia, and you're LSU and you're Texas, you are battling to stay where you are because everyone else is trying to catch you. And I'm look, Auburn, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Florida, I'm not trying to knock you guys too. You guys are all there too. I'm sure we'll upset some fans in the course of this conversation, but you're trying to protect yourself because your coach. Now, this is not the case for LSU and Brian Kelly, Brent Venables at Oklahoma, but like, let's say Tennessee and Georgia, they're trying to keep their guy. They want to keep their guy from being interested in the NFL, which we've well documented is a major problem for college brain drain right now. Coaches are just, it's a lot of work to be a college football coach. But if you're Kentucky, if you're Missouri, I would put Texas A&M in this group, and Tennessee, frankly, might actually count because they have not been to the top of the mountain in 25 years more. You're trying to go from B+ to A. And I don't like, how does Tennessee do that? They got elite facilities. They've got indoor practice this. They've got the stadium. They've got the resources. They got the fans. Is it simply just paying players? I mean, the NIL, what do you hear from recruits? How about that question? What do you hear from recruits?
We asked that question. My kind of wise-ass answer was like, don't lose to South Carolina 2 years ago. And then they make the playoff. And then they, then maybe that's a step you take. So like a lot of it just boils down to winning the game, like winning on the field. But yeah,
but they were that
I know.
Program.
I know. That's why I
wasn't ready yet. Though.
Right. Exactly. I'm sort of kidding there. Yeah, I mean, money talks. It is. I mean, but when we've done a lot of these recruiting confidentials where we've got writers who go down to the All-American game in Orlando, I think it is, and talk to them about NIL. Confidential, off the record, just surveying. And the basic, we've been doing it 3 years, and this is what they're saying, that the majority of the elite, now these are the elite, these are the top 100, top 150 guys, do not go to the highest bidder. Money's important. They want to be compensated, but they go where they're comfortable. They like the coach. They like if it's the home state school or whatever, as long as they're in the ballpark. Like, again, I'm making these numbers up, but let's say you're a right tackle, and
go with Dylan Stewart. Go with Dylan Stewart, who did not go to a championship program. He went to South Carolina.
Yeah, so they're guys.
No disrespect, Gamecock.
Yeah, they're getting so much money anyway that if you would have told them 5 years ago when they were 13 years old, before NIL was really a thing, you can go to college and make $300,000 if you're an All-American or in your first year. So they're not like going to a place and taking $20,000 because they love the coach. They're getting $100,000, whatever, but maybe they had 120 from someone else. So like that is, we've heard that from too many recruits to say, oh, it's just a few guys. So
well, let me clarify what you're saying.
Yeah.
You're saying that
maybe I didn't explain that right.
The money margins aren't the most, because I have a tough time thinking about what I was like when I was 18 years old, and if somebody told me $130,000 to play here or $105,000 to play there, 130 is more.
Right. So what we're hearing is that they'll take the 105 if they're more comfortable at that place. Now
they're valuing other things more than we think they are.
Yes. They getting to the NFL, the pipeline, on all that stuff. So, again, the fit, staying close to home, playing in front of their parents, and all that stuff. That is kids out of high school. Maybe the transfer portal is completely different, but I think the transfer portal, you can all say there's two buckets. One is the kid who's just going for the highest bidder. Like, maybe I'm not a pro, I need to maximize. I need to maximize what I'm making in college. Then there's someone else that say, I think I can get to the NFL, or I think I can get to the NBA. I need to find the right fit on the court. So maybe I'll use basketball as an example. I could go and earn $250,000 somewhere, but I don't really like how they use 4 men like me, power forward. So I might go somewhere to take less money because that coach has sent the last 3-4 men to the NBA, or it fits my skills. So like, I think there's that's overgeneralizing, but I think from the portal, you just have to make a decision what's best for you, obviously. And sometimes it's not just, there are plenty of examples of kids going to the portal in basketball and playing for a crappy team and getting 25 shots a game. Maybe that's what they want, and they think that's their ticket to the NBA.
Don't you? And this is just a random observation. Don't you think that basketball lends itself to a different type of evaluation of the system? Like if you're going to play a super wide open press style where you're up and down, not playing much defense, Auburn, Alabama, but you're going to score a boatload of points and you're going to be super talented. Like, isn't it easier? I mean, I guess the only thing that would compare in football is like triple option versus air raid. I mean, those are very different with very different skill sets. But if you're a defensive player, like it's not like all of a sudden you're a 4 who's a stretch 4 who likes to shoot versus a 4 who's a power 4 who wants to back down on the block. Like,
yeah, I see what you're saying.
Does that make sense? Like,
I see what you're saying. I mean, I think wide receivers may be a position where you can be utilized better.
Okay.
You're asked to block more, which might enhance your NFL stock, or you don't like to block, so you don't want to go there. Or tight ends are used differently. So, yeah, so that's kind of again, it's 2 buckets in my opinion.
So, are you spending all your money on players and coaches?
Yes. I mean, it depends if I'm in a school that has a nice stadium and I've won recently. Yeah, I'm gonna spend my money on the players. If I'm a school that hasn't won a ton, obviously the players are important. You might need to get over the hump to where you're respectable from a stadium standpoint.
So you and I have talked a lot over the years about ranking the programs, ranking the jobs, sort of devoid of current personnel, current rosters, athletic directors, NCAA sanctions, sort of take that out of it. Your sort of natural inherent advantages as a university and a program, namely geography, access to players and resources, have always been sort of the defining parts of championship DNA, which you and I have defined for many years. It certainly feels like that's more complicated because, and again, I want to go to Dan Lanning here at Oregon, a former SEC guy who, by all accounts, was Alabama's first choice last year. They can tell us whatever story they want to tell us about Kalen DeBoer, who's a very good coach. But Dan Lanning was largely their first choice. He is signing huge extensions and recruiting at an elite level, won a Big Ten championship, making the playoff, has everything he needs with Phil Knight at Oregon. They are spending money to protect themselves, to keep anyone else from coming to get Dan Lanning. And outside of Georgia, and this shout out to host Stephen Godfrey, who is taking a hiatus from this program. He'll be back soon.
Taking a hiatus from you, which is nice.
From me.
Yeah.
I guess I'm not paying well enough. He and
definitely not me.
He and his cohorts on Split Zone Duo, go check it out. Great podcast feed. They did this episode this week, and this is I saw all these news stories, and then I was listening to them going like, this is part of this. This has to be part of the conversation, which is that Oregon has elevated itself to a point in this conversation where you and I probably would have had Oregon in the relative to SEC programs, probably like 8th, 7th, 8th, 9th, roughly speaking, like 19, 20, 21 in the country ballpark. Alabama, Florida, Georgia, LSU, Texas, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Auburn, A&M would all be sort of maybe ahead of Oregon if you were ranking the jobs. I don't think that's the case anymore based on a lot of things: money, portal, resources, NCAA rules, that free agency and recruiting is now national for almost everybody. It's no longer as much of a 6-hour radius, although you did just get done saying that the money and that it's still more about some of the other stuff if you're a top 150 guy.
Yeah.
Their theory is that outside of Georgia and Ohio State, they're not sure anyone could come take Dan Lanning from Oregon. And this is interesting because LSU and Brian Kelly, once viewed by many, yourself and myself included, as a top 3, top 5 job in America, Brian Kelly's got a lot of pressure this year to win. Oklahoma, maybe not on that same tier of evaluation, but a top 10, top 15 program by every possible measure. Brent Venables under a lot of pressure to win right now. I don't think Kalen DeBoer's under pressure today, but in this hypothetical, he could be in 2 years. I do it outside of Georgia, who according to Godfrey, all the industry experts would say absolutely could go get Dan Lanning, and Ohio State could go get Dan Lanning. Their theory is that everybody outside of those two can't do it yet. And I'm curious because you said 9.2 and 9.8 on your mythical scale for Alabama. I think there's a lot of Alabama fans that would be pissed at 9.2.
Oh, sorry.
They love 9.8. That's what they believe they are.
Yeah. Well, go ahead. Are you done?
No. Go. Okay. Continue.
No.
I mean, you can go. Yes.
Yeah. So the phrase that I always use, and I think you've taken from me, that is like, you just never know what makes a guy tick as a coach. So let's just say he's not like, I think he's from Kansas City area.
From Missouri. Yeah.
So let's just assume he's not like, didn't grow up a diehard Missouri fan and would leave any job from Missouri. Let's just say he's like he's neutral coach as far as whatever. He just wants to win.
And according to Godfrey, there is no job like that for him.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I think that's accurate right now. I mean, he's had top 5 classes 2 years in a row. He was the number 1 seed in the playoff this year. They didn't win it, obviously, but they have a track record of success. He has a track record of, bringing in elite talent. They've done extremely well in the portal. There's a quarterback who goes to high school probably a mile and a half from me named Jared Curtis, who's Jared, I think his name, number 1 quarterback in the country, which I can't believe he goes to Nashville Christian.
Yeah.
He's deciding between Georgia and Oregon. He's down to 2 schools. I mean, if you would have told me, I know Oregon's always been a cool school and all that stuff, but if you would have told me 15 years ago that the number 1 quarterback is from Nashville and he's maybe not going to go to an SEC school.
And no interest in Alabama or Tennessee, the in-state school or the one closest.
Well, to all fairness, Tennessee has had a commitment from Faison Brandon, who at some point has been the number 1 quarterback in the next class. So, and Tennessee's quarterback recruiting has been very good. So yeah, it's really hard to. There are the only negatives of the Oregon job, you could say, is location, proximity to players. You got to work a little bit harder to recruit. You can't get the old cliche coach, get in my car and drive around for 5 hours and get all my players. You got to get on a plane to go recruit. And the travel, I don't think the travel is nearly as big of an issue in football as it is in basketball. We're seeing like Mick Cronin complain that's legit. In football, it's a pain in the ass, but it's 5
times a year.
Yeah, and if you're playing Washington every other year, you're playing UCLA, USC. It's not ideal, but it's not awful. So it's not something I'm leaving my job because of this. So I think that's very fair. Georgia and Ohio State. Obviously, we think he had the choice to go to Alabama. Now, maybe in 3 years, if Kalen DeBoer didn't work out and he doesn't want to be the guy that followed Nick Saban. And
that's the theory.
Yeah. Or there's also
I think it's premature to not put Alabama on that list.
Yeah. There's nothing. Both these kind of coaches are fine. The coach that stays at a place for 15 years and wins a bunch and quote unquote loyal, or the coach that does great work for 6 or 7 years, wins a national championship, and wants a new challenge. Like, that's not a bad person. We see that in basketball a lot. You move on to a different challenge. It doesn't make you like you're not loyal. You just want to try something else.
Well, and the NFL doesn't count in any of this. Like, if you're Lane Kiffin, you're Brian Kelly, it doesn't matter. If you're good enough, the NFL comes calling. The NFL is a bigger job with different. It's just a different calculus. I don't think Alabama. I think Alabama is on the list with Georgia and Ohio State. I'm not ready to look at Alabama and say historically, currently, revenue, success, talent, and say that they're not capable of pulling a coach from Oregon yet. I'm not ready to say that. I think what is eye-opening is that I think it is absolutely the case for Oklahoma. I think Brent Venables, under a lot of pressure, who knows what's going to happen. I love the experiment with Ben Arbuckle and John Mateer. I think it's going to be interesting to watch. But if the Oklahoma job comes open after losing a coach of his own volition to USC, they are not able to go get a coach like Dan Lanning now. Now, is that just because Dan Lanning is special, packaged with a very unique situation in Oregon? Maybe. LSU, I think, is the one that's on the line. That's the one where I don't know yet. And Godfrey has said this on this show for the entire season, which is that the leveling out of the talent is very real and it's permanent. And I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, but that's basically what he's saying. I don't think it's as permanent yet. I need to see more over time from other conferences before I say they've caught up with the SEC permanently. They've certainly caught up with them the last few seasons, but Michigan and Ohio State have always been capable. Mm-hmm. Penn State and Oregon have never won a championship. So until that happens, I'm not ready to kind of go full on.
Penn State has, but not.
Well, not as a Big Ten team and not since I was 3 years old. So, no, I don't think that. Not in the modern era. They have not. They're trying to. Oregon has been very, very close. But what does it say about LSU and the SEC status and sort of where people are putting resources? Because by all accounts, NIL has been pretty good at Oklahoma, pretty good at Alabama, and pretty good at LSU starting to kick up real. I was talking to T-Bob Hebert at the Senior Bowl, and he's like, dude, the NIL money is pouring in. at LSU
because they win 8-4 or whatever they win. You know.
Exactly. It's nothing motivates like a few losses.
Yeah.
Let's stay on LSU for a second. Like, why? What do you do if you're LSU and all of a sudden you look up and you've been turned down? And this is all hypothetical here around Brian Kelly, right? Like Brian Kelly right now has done a pretty good job. I would be interested to see what you think what the next 18 to 24 months are for Brian Kelly at LSU. But I'm just curious, like, what do you do if you're a program like Tennessee's in the same boat as LSU, A&M's in the same boat, trying to elevate to an A+ program to win a national championship in a new era and a new landscape of college football?
Yeah, I mean, I think LSU's an elite job. They hired a coach from Notre Dame, so that tells you where they are on the food chain. And I mean, I know it's different sports, but they've pulled in elite coaches in other sports too. I know we're talking football here, so I'm not going to let 2 subpar seasons by LSU standards kick them down the food chain too much. LSU's interesting. They had the Heisman Trophy winner at quarterback. They had 2 first-round receivers. You know, they've had talent, and
they won the division in his first year.
Right. Maybe if their NIL was a little bit better and they got a few more defensive linemen, they would have won more games. So I think LSU is a far superior job than Oklahoma. Oklahoma has been very, up until last 3 years, two of the last 3 years, they've not had a good record. They've been extremely consistent program, under different coaches, different league though, different time. So I understand the premise and I like the argument. I mean, I like the debate, but it's also like you put another coach. Oregon just lost 2 coaches, and Oregon's always had money. I know it's pre-NIL, but they paid coaches well. They had unbelievable facilities. They had everything. So they lost 2 coaches. Dan Lanning is a different breed. He's a different guy, and so he's opted evidently to turn down other opportunities.
I do think, to your point, I do think this is more a conversation around Oregon and Lanning and less a conversation around some of the specific SEC programs. But then again, if what Oregon has accomplished is gone from B+ to A+ program, a team that's basically done everything but win the national championship, I know a handful of programs that would spend just as much money to do that. In fact, one of them just spent $76 million to not have a head football coach in Texas A&M.
Yeah.
So why can't A&M? Why can't Tennessee? I would put Auburn into this conversation, although Auburn has a very the water being strange on the plains just messes with everything. You're just not sure exactly what is the strat. Like, what can you learn from Oregon then? If you were LSU, if you're Tennessee, and maybe LSU is a bad example because they've had bad coaches win national championships, but like A&M has not figured it out in like 70 years, and Tennessee got one in 98, but that's the one they've had in like 50 years. What is it? Is it just having a Phil Knight? What is the lesson here to be learned?
It's hard. There's one champion a year, and yet some dude in Alabama winning them every other year. So it's like, that's why I always talk about the SEC. Everyone's trying to win at an elite level. I would say there's now 16 teams, 14 teams, fan bases think they should win a national championship.
14?
Yeah, 13.
Mississippi State fan and Missouri fan are not saying
okay. That. I was putting no Vanderbilt, no Kentucky, and I was putting half of Missouri. I don't know. Mississippi State has won some. They were the number 1 team in the country. Okay, so maybe you know what I'm saying. Okay, so let's say 11 fan bases, and I don't know which 11 think they should win national championships over a 5-year period.
Arkansas and South Carolina are the 2 on the line.
Yeah, then you've got Ohio State, which is in that boat. And then Michigan kind of fell out of that boat, but they won a championship a couple years ago, and you got Penn State. So, I mean, I'm not trying to be a wise ass. Like, there's no secret sauce. Like, you think Texas A&M, we've written about it. Everyone's written about, like, why can't they win? If they knew, they would win. It's just.
Well, I guess my theory is that it's different. The strategy that we've all written about for decades is now different because Oregon is showing us that it's different.
And but Texas A&M has tons of money too.
That's kind of my point is that if Oregon can do it in the middle of nowhere, which albeit is a gorgeous, beautiful, wonderful place.
Okay, let me interject for a second. We're saying they've done it. Have they?
I think that's fair point.
I'm just being devil's advocate.
No, it's a fair question. I think they have elevated themselves to a different tier. To go back to our conversations, and if those of you don't know, Mitch and I used to like rank the programs on the podcast for like 15 years. It's one of our favorite episodes where we would look through and say, all right, which job is better? If you're Coach A and the rosters are clear, where would you go work? Where's the place that you could win the fastest? Put Nick Saban there, right? Peak Nick Saban. It's the Nick Saban test. And if you put Nick Saban in 2010, which is ironic because it was Auburn versus Oregon. If you put Nick Saban at Auburn and Oregon, I bet you he wins much faster at Auburn. Right?
Yeah.
In 2020.
Recruiting, because that 2010, and you can make all the throw the bag jokes out there, recruiting was more difficult at Oregon because of its lack of access to players. It just look at Auburn, Alabama on a map and draw, a circle around. You got Atlanta, You got Nashville, you got Birmingham. Obviously, there's just more players.
And it wasn't like there were some programs even during that era, Notre Dame, Stanford. There are some programs that recruited nationally. At the top of the ladder, you had maybe Florida under Urban Meyer. You had Nick Saban with Alabama. Now you've got Kirby with Georgia. There were maybe like half a dozen programs that recruited quote unquote nationally. Notre Dame does it for sure. Now, I think the theory is that everyone recruits nationally, that there are no players. Yeah. There's nobody in the portal that play. Like, you now have $1 million general managers. You talk about where to invest resources. Alabama has the highest paid general manager.
And Oklahoma, they had to keep him away from USC,
And Oklahoma just hired Jim Nagy. And, honestly, Vanderbilt was one of the first people to ever do that.
Yeah.
And now you're going to see him everywhere, and it's going to be a 7-figure job. And so ultimately my point is that that recruiting dynamic and you can't do the Nick Saban test. I mean, hell, Nick Saban walked away from the game to some degree because of all of this shit. And so to my question is, I guess my point is, what I find interesting is all the ground is shifted and it's different, right? There's no question about all of that. Can A&M still leverage having an elite recruiting base, the greatest resources of all time, and still go accomplish and do what Oregon did from an elevation of themselves to a different point? Like, it does feel like all it takes now is money. And I don't like saying that, but that's how it feels. But that's not all that different than what it was.
Right. I think I know what you're getting at. Like, A&M, the thing that puzzles everyone about A&M is because they've had the money, they've got an elite fan base, great environment, stadium, access to players. And some of it comes down to just coaching. When all these teams have a lot of talent, can you beat Notre Dame when they come in on opening day? Can you throw the ball enough? And they, for whatever reason, they've had good coaches. They haven't had great coaches, or they've had coaches that won national championships elsewhere that didn't get it done there. Like Alabama had a great coach, an elite coach, and he won games. We think Dan Lanning's a really good coach. He's made some interesting. I'm pro Dan Lanning. I'm not one of these people that say, "Oh, he screws his go for it all you want." Yeah. So, but
his record is awesome.
Yeah. So like it's when John Calipari was through, they played Vanderbilt, and this is not an original comment, but you'll hear a lot of coaches say that he's like, administrations win championship, coaches win games. So you have a lot of administrations have set their programs up to win championships, but the coaches have to win the games to get the championship. And sometimes you win them and sometimes you don't. Sometimes the ball bounces. Sometimes a 21-year-old kid makes a dumb decision and throws the ball over the middle and it gets picked.
So players win plays, coaches win games, and administrations win championships.
According to John Calipari.
First time ever. I agree with John Calipari.
I did not agree with John Calipari when he decided that it was better for his team to be up 3 points than 4 points last week. The dumbest coaching decision of all time. But you know what I'm talking about?
No, I did not see it, but Mario Chalmers agrees.
So, SEC tournament, first game against South Carolina. They come way back. South Carolina comes down. I love this debate. There's a real debate about sometimes it's better to miss a free throw when you're only up 1 and there's not enough time for the other team to get a 2-point shot off. Like if they can just grab the rebound. So John L. Davis gets fouled. They're up 2 points with 2.5 or I don't even know, 2 seconds to go. And I know you don't care, but I got to explain this to you. He hits the first free throw. They're up 3 points with 2 seconds to go. He tells him to miss the free throw because in South Carolina has to get the rebound and go length.
That's the most John Calipari thing.
Dumbass, I would rather be up 4 points.
So is his theory like if they inbound and we foul him and he makes it, they can get a 4-point play? Is that his theory?
He was interviewed on the court after the game about it and in the press conference, and he just said a bunch of gibberish. He's like, I do things unconventionally. So unconventionally means there is no scenario in basketball where I'd rather be up 3 points than 4 points. I would always rather be up 4 points.
It sounds like John Calipari is still John Calipari. But that's also an interesting point because I feel like that's part of the conversation around football is like, again, Eddie George just takes a job. Deion Sanders is doing well. Deshaun Jackson, Michael Vick, all coaches right now. Those are roll the ball out there guys. Those are John Calipari hires. It's about recruiting. It's about this is an attention economy. It is about attention and rolling the ball out there, but then you pay the talent to come because I want to have better players than everybody else. Way easier in basketball and way easier at places like Bowling Green and Jackson State and Tennessee State and Norfolk State and Delaware State and Colorado than it is at A&M or LSU. So that is
you're going against elite coaches.
Exactly. You got to have some level. To your point about stadiums being table stakes, you got to be a good enough coach to compete, right? But here's an interesting dynamic to think about going back and seeing how all the rules have changed and then what happened since. Brian Kelly's decision to leave Notre Dame is fascinating to me because of why he said he was leaving.
Yeah.
Marcus Freeman stepping in and being their Dan Lanning. Like Marcus Freeman is the Dan Lanning of Notre Dame. And Brian Kelly's under a lot of pressure to win right now. And I don't know what that I don't know again, is that just a very random specific occurrence with a specific coach? Or is there some larger story behind, the lesson behind Brian Kelly? Does he stay at Notre Dame if the rules were different? Or do you see what I'm saying?
This is a boring answer, and especially in football when there's so few games and like one or two things can sway at 8-4 versus 10-2. Like I said before, what if they had been more successful on 2 portal guys in the defensive line or whatever, linebacker? And they won a couple more games, and then we have a different conversation. I know that again, that's like, it's easy to say that, but it's just sometimes things happen, and they might go on a run over the next 3 years and win 2 national championships, or they might. I just think it's just same thing with A&M. Like A&M they had talent, they were close, it just never came together, and it's just part of it was you had one guy hogging all the titles for the most part, and all the recruiting classes. So all you can do, not all you can do, if you're a school athletic director. Maximize your resources, hire the best coach possible, and hope for the best. You put your people in the best possible situation to win. It's like a play in college basketball. At the end of the game, you're down 2 points. You draw up a play. You've done all the work. Yeah. You get your shooter open. He either makes it or he misses it. And if he makes it, you're incredible. If he misses it, you're a dumbass.
Well, and I think to your point about administrations winning championships, I think that's what Danny White is trying to do at Tennessee. Like he has brought stability unlike Tennessee has seen in 20 years. Heupel can win games. They just need Nico to become the guy who wins every play, and he has not yet done that.
That's a perfect example. They thought they had the quarterback. He hasn't been the quarterback yet. He might be this year.
He's going to need to overcome some personnel deficiencies.
Yeah, so like that's
no, I agree. Example. I agree.
They are set up, and we don't need to ever question Tennessee's commitment. Their commitment's been there. Their instability and their craziness has been a factor, but they're committed. They got a coach, and he's great. He's a good coach, and it's not like elite, but he's done a great job there. They've had talent. They thought they had an elite quarterback, and he's a good quarterback. He just hasn't been elite yet, and that's why. I mean, like we all love recruiting. We all love the 5-star quarterbacks, but dude, I've done the research. Everyone's done the research. You know how many 5-star quarterbacks don't end up being good? It's not as easy as just signing a 5-star quarterback. Yeah. It's evaluating a guy. Be sure he's got what it takes to play in your system, all that stuff. So it ain't easy.
I always thought during their walk through the college football desert, Tennessee, through their own mistakes and decision making, I always thought the conversations, in particular from loud Kentucky media people that I would consider friends, that Tennessee's lost it. It's lost its thing. It's lost its ability. It's not a premier program, and I always thought the conversation around the recruiting base was always very, very wrong. The 6-hour radius, to your point, in the old ways of recruiting around Knoxville includes almost Valdosta, Georgia, almost Jackson, Mississippi, almost all of almost to Richmond,
North Carolina,
North Carolina, Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee. Like there's a lot of talent in a 6-hour radius around Knoxville. And the resources and the commitment have never been the problem. In fact, like Auburn, sometimes it's too much.
Too much, yeah.
Too much. And so it is about putting together alignment and, all that other stuff. I don't exactly know what we accomplished.
Not much
in this conversation, but I find it fascinating. And I like if it's interesting to me and to you, the audience, and you're trying to answer questions about where to invest. You don't think this is complicated stuff for athletic departments, for general managers? Like it's very, very complicated right now, and it's moving under our feet every day.
Yeah, I know. I will say one more thing about the whole NIL and investment thing, which I find interesting too. And this is college football too, but we're in basketball season, so like you have coaches taking jobs or interested in jobs because they're quote unquote committed. They have good NIL. They have all this, and we don't know where this is all going with the house money. Schools don't know if there's going to be how much NIL on top of that. But let's just say in the current setup, like nothing is forever. So let's just take West Virginia. It's open. I know that
go with North. Oh, you're talking basketball.
Yeah, let's just because it's all the same thing.
I was thinking Belichick going to North Carolina. Like he got an investment from NIL.
Right.
That's why he took the job.
Just so let's say state school A, they've got a great NIL. Well, let's say in 2 years, the two of your top investors or two of your top boosters, their companies they own go to shit, or like the economy side, and they can't do it. So like my point is coaches are taking jobs now more for the NIL than the history and the things that they took jobs for, like support and all that. And they can I'm just wondering for the first to backfire on them and be like, I'm in bumfuck. Can I say that? Whatever.
Yeah, you can say it.
And
you just
and I was told 2 years ago that this guy was going to support our NIL for the next 7 years, and now he's working at Target.
Do we know if Yellowwood guy has any offspring?
Yeah. So
like does the Yellowwood guy have a son who's also as committed to Auburn as Yellowwood guy is? What happens if Yellowwood guy dies? I've seen him in commercials. It could happen.
Yeah.
If he dies. Also, by the way, people, all of us die, just for the record. If he dies, like, is Auburn as dependent on Yellowwood's son and his heirs to the throne? Like, what are we doing?
Yeah. So we're talking generalizations, but like the commitment. I know a lot of schools have a lot of donors, a lot of boosters, but things are fluid financially in this world. And so I just find that interesting.
Last football question though, then, and that is, do you think then that the theory that Godfrey has posed on this show, which is that the sort of balancing of power between the North and the South is a little bit more permanent? Is that what you're saying? Like that or do you think it's fluid in the Big Ten and the SEC could come right? Because my theory has always been, it's fluid. The SEC, if the Big Ten is showing us that they can do something with resources, the SEC is going to do that shit too.
I'll cop out and say somewhere in the middle. I just think there are more SEC programs that are built for success, and there are more SEC programs that care enough to fix whatever's wrong. Where if like the Big Ten has the Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, it's had Wisconsin, Oregon. Wisconsin, USC, those I'm not going to argue those top of that league is built SEC like, but the next tier, I'd say, of SEC programs, schools, fan bases care more, will do what it takes more. So that's why I'm never going to say it's completely shifted, but I agree with Stephen for the most part.
I think it's temporary. I think it's going to be temporary until the SEC, to your point, figures out how to do it the same way, and then more schools will do it. Again, are you suggesting that perhaps it means more?
That's what you're saying. Think so. I am suggesting that.
All right, ML Rose, 6 great locations, ML Rose Burgers and Beer. Make sure you go check them out. They're fantastic. Okay, so here's a couple of hoops questions here, and we'll wrap up here in a few, like rapid fire.
I'm hungry, so hurry up.
As am I. Four out of the top 6 seeds in the tournament are going to be SEC schools. You got Alabama, Auburn, Florida, and Tennessee.
Not going to be SEC schools.
The tournament hasn't started yet, Mitch.
But you said they're going to be SEC schools.
When the tournament starts.
There are schools in the SEC. This is what Braden had to put up with for years. So we don't talk much, so when I do talk to you, I feel like I need to catch up and make up for lost time.
Would you like to grab lunch at ML Rose, perhaps?
Great idea.
I would love to take you out. How about that?
Thank you. Not today, though. I'm too hungry.
Of those 4, you can pick one to win the national championship. Who are you picking?
Oh, of those 4, my national championship pick is not one of those, but I would go with Florida, which is kind of boring. Yeah, I'm going Duke. Partly because Florida's so trendy right now. I would go Auburn over Florida just because of the bucking the trend. Like Auburn's kind of limping in a little bit, losing 3 of 4, and Florida looked like the best team in the history of basketball at the SEC tournament. I think Duke is the best overall team.
I have Duke over Florida.
I have Duke over Michigan State.
I have Michigan State in the Final Four as well.
Yes.
So Florida, Michigan State, former national championship matchup, and then I've got Duke, Kentucky, former Final Four matchup.
I don't trust Kentucky. I don't think they have enough.
I know.
I think they're injuries right now. And,
I just can't pick Tennessee in a game against Kentucky in the tournament. I can't do it.
That would be wild.
I can't pick Rick Barnes, unfortunately, as an alumni. I say that as an alumni. So I guess my question is, will Tennessee make its first ever Final Four appearance?
I don't think so. I don't.
Yeah.
Fun team to watch. I love Ziegler. I just don't trust them enough offensively. Like, just
not a lot of depth either.
True.
Relative to Florida, at least, after watching
Florida's like waves of dudes.
It's waves of dudes. That's what I was going to say. It's just wave after wave after wave.
Yeah. Lots of dudes.
All right. So Auburn is your pick of the 4 top
I haven't filled out a
teams.
bracket yet. So, yeah. But, yeah.
It's getting close, man. It's Wednesday afternoon.
I know.
What about upset teams? What about teams down the list of the 14 that made it? Who do you think makes a run in the tournament?
So, from a first-round upset, I went total homer, and I picked Lipscomb, like, here in Nashville. Because, like, I know they're really well coached and they got dudes who can shoot it. And then someone who, like, knows more basketball and be like, oh, it's a terrible matchup with Iowa State. They're going to get killed. But
I was talking about the SEC. But
okay. Sorry.
Like, why not Vanderbilt? Your alma mater.
Yeah. Interesting game. Vanderbilt St. Mary's, like, very contrasting styles. St. Mary's, a lot of tall dudes. Vanderbilt's undersized. Vanderbilt has good offensive numbers, but they need to turn you over and get easy buckets. And St. Mary's does not turn the ball over much, although they did in the Gonzaga game I saw. They turned the ball over there. Vanderbilt has played, like, might mean nothing, but Vanderbilt has played St. Mary's 4 times in the past, like, 10, 12 years, and they've out-athleted. They're 3-1, and sometimes they just out-athleted them. Yeah. And that's kind of the hope from Vanderbilt, that they can just Vanderbilt's not the most athletic team in the SEC, but they're far more athletic than St. Mary's. So I picked Vanderbilt just to be a homer, like, because I went to school there. Like, objectively, it seems like a tough matchup. St. Mary's is really good. The 17-1 in their league. But that should be good. Who's
the most overrated SEC team?
Most overrated SEC team
in the turn from a seed, like in the tournament.
I think Kentucky is a 3 just because their defense is not very good and their injuries. I guess Lamont Butler is going to play. Like, Oklahoma had them beat. That was a miracle. First of all, it's a huge collapse by Kentucky, and then a miracle finish there. I love Mark Pope. I think
he's gonna be good. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a good hire, and he's done a good job this year. They're a really fun offensive team, but I don't trust the defensively, and then with the injuries. Well,
then you didn't really kind of answer. Like, who's the team that surprises from the SEC that's in the Sweet 16, Final Four, Elite 8 that we're not talking about as much?
Well, I was maybe going to pick Ole Miss until I saw North Carolina win by 90 points last night.
I got North Carolina winning that one. So
I actually I did do a bracket. I lied. I forgot. I had to do one for work. I think I picked Texas to beat Xavier. Then I picked Texas to beat Kentucky. No, Texas beat Illinois, then Kentucky. So I had Texas in the like maybe Trey Johnson goes off for a couple games. So there's Texas in the Sweet 16.
I could be down. Shaka Smart's doing a great job down there.
He's not the coach.
I'm aware.
Is it VCU?
All right. What? No, I'm just kidding. All right. Mitch Light Athletic. Make sure you check him out. You can follow him on the machines, the Twitter machines, the internet machines, all the other machines. Thank you so much for joining us. Pay for good journalism. Go to ML Rose for a good burger in the city. Otherwise, have a great one, everybody. Thank you for listening and watching. I'm Braden Gall. We'll talk to you guys next week.